are in Kuf Mem Dalet Amid Base, 144b, and we were analyzing whether or not juices that come out of that was squeezed out of fruit that are not commonly squeezed for its juice, does that count as a liquid? And in particular, about a mikveh that had such juices that fell into it and changed its color, does it count as a juice, a foreign substance that changed it? Or do we say that it's really just water that's this color? And we had a Mishnah that said that if wine, vinegar, or mohel fell into a mikveh and changed its color. So we saw three reasons. Abaye said it's either Rabbi Yaakov, which holds that mohel is a mashke, that this mohel, which is some sort of juices that come out, do count as a liquid, and therefore it should make it tamei. And why do we say that when mohel comes out at first, that it's tar, meaning it does not make other produce, it doesn't count as a liquid to make produce susceptible to tumah, because you don't want it there. You don't want it to be there. You don't actually want it. And Rabbi Shimon says that actually it's not a mashke, it's not a juice. And yet, why does it make a mikveh? Why does it make the mikveh when it changes color, makes it invalid? The reason is because there's mikveh, there's these juices that come out after it's already been softened, and it can't be that there's no oil in there. So it's true the juice itself is not going to count as a liquid, halachic liquid, but it will count because of the oils that are in there. That's the part you do want. And Rava says, and that's the last part that we didn't get to yesterday. Rava says, and this is really something we saw earlier in the day yesterday, that the juices that come out are something you cannot, even though that it doesn't count as a juice, and therefore it should count as just this colored water, but you can't use it to start to make a mikveh. And therefore, if I cannot make a mikveh from the start with these kind of with this kind of liquid, it will invalidate the mikveh if it falls in later and changes its color. Ultimately, what we were trying to learn was the halacha of schita ad Shabbos, squeezing a fruit for its juices. When you squeeze a fruit for its juices, does that make it? Does that count as schita if it's a type of fruit that no one squeezes? That's A. Or it was the permission that the Gemara said that you're allowed to squeeze plums and quince, and some said crab apples, that it actually wasn't for the juices at all. You were squeezing it because that made the fruit taste better. And you soften the fruit that way by squeezing it. So even though juice came out, but that you don't want the juice, and you're not even intending to juice it, you're intending to eat it, and you're just separating the juice out, which softens the fruit or makes it sweeter, and that's why it's permissible. And in either case, that's going to count as a separation of food from food, and permissible. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So Shmuel said, you're allowed to squeeze your grapes, and grapes being, even though that is a primary fruit that essentially is harvested or brought in for juicing. Nevertheless, if you juice it not into a barrel, but rather into your pot, so you're cooking with it, so it came out of the grape, which is food, and it's going into the pot, which is food, it's permissible. because it's going into food. But you can't put it into a plate, into a plate or a bowl. You cannot do that because that counts. That's too close to juicing it. So what we see is that Shmuel considers food that is squeezed into food, even though that it's a liquid form, and when it goes into the food, it counts as food and not as liquid. Masav Rami Bachamas and Rami Bachama challenged that. Zav shechaylev se'ez hachalav tamei. A zav, which is a tamei person, so the person himself is tamei, and he milks a goat. The milk becomes tamei. Now the milk, if it's a liquid, of course it's susceptible to tumah. But if it's considered food and not a halachic mashke, so it would need to become susceptible to tumah by a liquid, and it itself doesn't count as a liquid. As we just said, Shmuel is saying that the liquid itself, being that it comes from a solid and goes and is meant as food going into a solid, it counts as a solid, it counts as a food, and so it shouldn't be susceptible to tumah until a liquid came on it, and this doesn't have a liquid, even though it's in its molecular state. It's a liquid. It's not a gas and it's not a solid. But in halachic terms, it's food and not a liquid. Now, so how did this food, quote unquote, become susceptible to tumah? Where it says, as Rabbi Yochanan said elsewhere, that on the teat, on the udder itself, there's a bit of liquid. Always, there's the first bit that comes out, the last from a bit that's still there from the previous milking, and therefore that makes the every bit of milk that comes out susceptible to tumah as a liquid. There's that droplet on the udder, on the teeth. Masav Ravina. A person who himself is tamei, came into contact with a deceased person, and he's squeezing olives or squeezing grapes, and we go to Kuf Mem Hem and Aleph, kebetza. It's a mechuvenes, an exact betza size. Now, we know that food is only susceptible to tumah if it's a betza size. Now, the first bit that came out is going to be, if that counts as a liquid, it's going to, that means the rest of it doesn't count as a kibetza size. So even though it itself becomes tamei, as a food, it cannot make liquids become tamei, because food does not make liquid tamei unless it itself is a kibetza. But it itself is not a kibetza because you needed the first bit to make it susceptible to tumah, and once you use the first bit, you have less than exact the betza size, which is an egg size, because you've already used part of it, and now I don't have a betza size that can make other things tamei. So tar, so the rest is going to be tahor. Ha yosim a kibetza. But if it's larger than a kibetza, tamei, then it would be tamei. Now, why? Again, why didn't I say that it's not a liquid, it's a food, and as a food, it needs to be made susceptible to tumah by a liquid, and it doesn't have that. So he said, who tells you you're squeezing into a pot? Maybe you're squeezing into a bowl, a plate, and that counts as liquid, not a food. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, actually, this idea of whether a liquid that comes from a solid going into a food, does that count as food or liquid, would be the basis of another machlokes and a brisa, and we have the basis for that in this upcoming machlokes. Hamachlik ba'anovim, somebody who, and it's common nowadays that if we have make bread or challah or other pastries, that we would egg the top, take an egg and use some of the egg to put a thin layer of veneer on it, and that makes it shine and gives it color. Somebody sometimes they would do that with grape. So somebody squeezes grape onto a bread in order to give it a color on the outer side. This is really just a thin layer of on the food. So now the first opinion says this bread is now susceptible to tumah because it has a liquid on it. Rabbi Yehuda so loy hukshar. Sorry, the first opinion says it does not count as a liquid, and it does not make it susceptible to tumah. And Rabbi Yehuda says it does. So my love. So what's the basis of machlokas? Wouldn't you say that the machlokas is based on this? Mar savar mashka b'lo. The first opinion says liquid that comes onto a solid counts as a solid, and therefore this bread was never made susceptible to tumah with a liquid. It never had a liquid on it, even though you squeezed some grape on it, but that became a solid, a food. And the other says, no, it does not count as a food. Rav Papa says, no, everybody would agree that it's not food. It's a liquid. But rather, machlekes is based on that this is really going to be destroyed. Because it really, in and of itself, is not going to be. It's going to go to waste. And we'll plug to the Hani Tanai, and we find a similar machlokes, and this is the basis. The Tani we learned. Somebody whose hands are tummy, and he's squeezing the olives, and that makes it soft, which is a part of the process of getting it ready for in its fermentation in order to be able to squeeze out the oils and make it a food. So his hands are tummy, and he's squeezing these olives. Huchshar, that makes it susceptible to tumah. The liquids that come out make it susceptible to tumah, because actually the juices that come out are beneficial to it, because that actually increases it makes it softer and makes it tastier. Lasvaisa mamelach, if he's he wants to brine these olives, and he's squeezing it not to get the juices out, but rather in order to make it make the surface soft enough that it would take to brine. The salt would stick to it. So then it's not made susceptible to tumah because it actually does not want the juices. If he's squeezing it to test it to see whether the olives are ready for squeezing, for getting the oils out, and he's testing it. So this is not because he wants to soften it. Rather, it's because he's testing to see whether they are already ready after sitting in the barrels for a while. So there we're going to say it's not going to be it's not going to become susceptible to tumah. In other words, the juices that come out don't count because he actually doesn't want the juices itself, because he doesn't care if it stays there or if it goes to waste. Or he's just trying to figure out whether they're ready, and this is just a sample. Rabbi Yehuda, however, Rabbi Yehuda says that it is susceptible to tumah, meaning the juices count and do count as a liquid and make it tameh. Because even though that the juice is going to be wasted and it doesn't care about it, nevertheless it is a juice that came out, and it'll count as something that's susceptible to tumah. Amar Rabbi Zera, Mechir Rashi Amarav. Oh, 1 second. So we have one more. The last link that we have to put it back to is the question of the bread. So the squeezing onto the bread. There, you for sure don't want it to you don't want it to go to waste. So you can't say that there the machlokas is based on whether or not it's going to waste, because you're purposely putting it on the bread and it's not a waste, as that's your intention, right? And so we're going to go back and say that it's whether or not a mashka bala eichel liquid that comes in the food, is it food or not? Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Barashi Amarav. Sechet adam eshkol shalavim letoch. Sorry, I skipped the line. Amar Rabbi Beredi B'Shua Hani Tanoi b'mashka oimed leibud pli v'hanach Tanoi b'mashka oimed tzach tzachoi kamiflagi. The first opinion, this first brisa that we were talking about, squeezing the bread, is when you're putting on a minute amount just of liquid, and you're not adding it to the food. That's a machlokas. The first opinion says it doesn't count as a liquid because you're just putting it there as a shine on the bread, and it doesn't count as food. And the second opinion says it does, but because since it's not for waste, it does count as a liquid and is makes it susceptible to tone. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Chi Barashi, Amarav, Sechet Adam Eshkol Shalanav Techa Kadera Avalelu Techa Kara. A person is allowed to. We had just seen in the brisa that a person can squeeze grapes into a pot, which makes it food, but not into a plate, because that makes it a juice. What about the dog and a fish, letzira, for its oils? There, even into a bowl is going to be permissible, because that's always going to be food. That's not a liquid. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Dimi B'Kamal Lashmaita. A Rabbi Dimi who traveled, as we saw, came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel and back, and so he came to Bavel and he taught this teaching. Amalei Abayla Rav Dimi Abayah said, "Atum mishmei de Rav masnitin." You stated this teaching in the name of Rav, and therefore you had no problem with it. Anan mishmei de Shmuel masmina lovekashlan. But we taught it in the name of Shmuel, and therefore we had a problem. We had a question. So Rav Dimi taught it in the name of Rav, and therefore it fit. But Shmuel, it seems contradictory in the opinion of Shmuel. Abayah says, I heard that this is Shmuel's opinion. Did Shmuel say that you can squeeze fish for its oils, for its juices, into a plate? You pickle some fruits, some vegetables, some greens, whatever it may be. You pickled something, and now it's got more brine or vinegar in it than you want. So you squeeze out your pickle, but your intent is to eat the pickle. You don't need the brine or vinegar from it. Amarav legufan mutter. If you're squeezing it out, but you don't care for the juices that come out. You want the food, the pickled vegetable. Mutter. So you're allowed to squeeze it that way. Lemeimean putter. But if you want the brine, there it's going to be prohibited. However, it's not going to be a Torah prohibition. It's going to be a rabbinic prohibition. So it's going to be exempt. And if you did it on Shabbos, you don't have to bring a sin offering, because you're not extracting the juices of the fruit of the food itself. You're extracting juices that you soaked it in and essentially infused it with. And so it's not going to be a Torah prohibition as squeezing grapes and pomegranates, and even like plums, where which we said is permissible. There, where the reason it's not common to do, but the point is it's a part. It really is a part of the fruit. Here, you're squeezing out something that never was the fruit itself. The food itself, you've infused it, and therefore, when you squeeze it, if even though you want the juices that are coming out from there, it's going to be a derabanan, a rabbinic prohibition, not a daraisa prohibition. And if you intended, if you did so unintentionally on Shabbos, you do not bring a sin offering. So it's pater avalos, ushlakos, and cooked vegetables. Bein lekufa bein lemeim muter. So you cook a vegetable in your chicken soup, whether you squeeze it out because you want the vegetable or you squeeze it out because you want the broth. Either way, it's going to be permissible. Shmuel Amar, so that's the first opinion. And Shmuel says, echad kavash echad shalakas, regardless of whether it's brine, pickled vegetables or cooked vegetables. Legufan mutal memeim pater avalase. If you're trying to eat the food and you don't care for the juice that comes out, so that's going to be permissible. If you intend for the juices to come out, then it's going to be prohibited, even though that it's rabbinic, and therefore you don't bring a sin offering if you did so on Shabbos. So he says, well, that based on that, according to Shmuel, that it's prohibited. So even your fish should be prohibited. Amar lei. So he responded to Rabbi Dimi. Responded Elikim by Hashem, by God. Einei ra'u v'lo zar. He's paraphrasing pasuk. My eye saw it, not other. In other words, I heard it directly. Mipume de Rabbi Yirmiyah Shemieli. I heard it directly from Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah heard it directly from Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera, Rav Kia Barashi. Rav Kia Barashi, Rav. So I not only do I know that I heard it from Rav, but I can tell you the direct lineage of my quote from Rav. I heard it from Rabbi Yirmiyah, who heard it from Rabbi Zera, who heard it from Rav Kia Barashi, who heard it from Rav. So we're getting into the depth of schita, and what we've learned here is that not only is there a prohibition of squeezing out the juices of a fruit that primarily are made as fruit juices, that's the Torah prohibition. So juice fruits such as grapes and olives, but for the Isser Torah of squeezing, the primary juicing, what you have to do is be extracting. You have to extract the fruit, the center of, or the what's encapsulated in the fruit itself. But when you infuse something, that's an external thing. It has to be the internal and the primary, and then it counts as the Torah prohibition of schita. Otherwise, it's going to be a rabbinic prohibition if it's similar, such as by pomegranates, which is like that, or in a pickle where you want the brine. So those are both similar, but not the Torah level prohibition, and therefore they're going to be prohibited. And it has to be that you do so for the juice as a liquid. If you do so for the juice as a food, meaning you squeeze your lemon onto your salmon, that's going to be permissible too. Or if you if you're sucking on your orange, there, as we saw, that's a food. And it's in your mouth, and if you do so in the process of eating, for sure, that's not going to be creating a liquid. That's a part of the eating, and so it's going to be food. So the definition of schita is going to be extracting a liquid that's encapsulated in a food, and you do so in something that is primary to such juicing. And it has to be its natural juice and not something infused in it. Somebody has a question? Michael.
I don't know if I have a question. I'm trying to put my arms around the fact that this is a doraisa. This is not a gezerah. This is not an interpretation that they extended it to this, but they didn't extend it to that. The Chachamim could make a gezerah and say, that's not included in the gezerah. That's not. But here, you have, for all intents and purposes, the same exact process or the same exact act, whatever it is. But here, if it's on this, it's okay. But if it's on that, it's not okay. And it I keep thinking, oh, okay, so that wasn't included in the Gezerah, but it's not a Gezerah, it's a Deraisa. So we're defining what the Deraisa is, but it's just weird to me that the Deraisa is being defined, limiting it to specific things and not to other things. Because the act is the same act. It doesn't matter whether you squeeze the lemon on a piece of fish or squeeze a lemon in a glass. What you did was the same thing. It's the same thing.
He did not do the same thing at all.
Well, I'm saying mechanically inside of the structure of the lemon, it's the same thing.
Well, that's true for most of what we learned in this Masechta. You're doing the exact same thing, but the classification of it is going to change. Meleches machshavas asar Torah, right? We saw that the intent defines so much of what we've seen in Shabbos. If I extinguish a fire and I'm trying to make coal, Torah prohibition. If I extinguish a fire because I want it to be dark in here, so it's a rabbinic isser, but it's not a Torah. I'm doing mechanically exactly the same thing, but my intent defines what my action is. Am I being creative or destructive? Every time you break something on Shabbos, if you intend to break it in order to put something together again, so that counts as breaking for reconstructing, and if not. So much of Shabbos is defined by what, not only my physical act, but the surroundings of that physical act are going to tell me how to define the act. Is it a creative act or is it not? And if I'm juicing a grape, a lemon onto my salmon, or a grape into the pot, so by definition, I've not created juice out of a fruit, but I've just included food in my food. And therefore it's permissible. But if I've juiced it into a cup, into a plate, so now I've created the extraction of juice from a solid, from the food, and that's the schita.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Gufa. Kvashin shesachtar. So analyzing this previous statement of pickles that you squeeze out. Amarav legufan mutter. So Rav said, if you did so for the you just want a less juicy pickle, but you want the food, you don't want the brine, that's permissible. Lemeimein pater avalaser. If you want the brine, it's going to be rabbinically prohibited, but you would not bring a sin offering if you did so on Shabbos. Ushlakas and cooked foods. So bein legufa bein lemein mutter. Then you're allowed to squeeze it whether you want to get rid of the juices and you want it a drier food, or because you want the broth. Either way, it's going to be permissible. And Shmuel says, Shmuel Amar echazeh echazeh legufan mutter. Either way, whether it's cooked or brine, pickled or a soup, if you're going to squeeze it because you want the food itself with less juice in it, permissible. And if you want the broth or the brine and you're trying to extract that liquid from the food, pater, even though that you're exempt because it's a rabbinic prohibition of al-asr, it's still prohibited. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, however, Rabbi Yochanan is a new opinion which we didn't see yet, and he's going to go to the extremes. Amar echad kvashav echad shlokas. Whether you cooked it or you brined it. Legufan, if you want the food itself with less of the juices in it, mutter, that you're allowed to do. However, lemeimein, if you're trying to extract the juices, chayiv chatas, that's a Torah prohibition, because again, you're extracting, and as Tosa points out, even though you're extracting a foreign substance that you infused into this pickle, into this cooked vegetable, that's true. But right now, it's in there and you're extracting it and you want the juice, that's going to be a Torah prohibition, and you bring a sin offering for that. And he says that too, you're creating, it's a creative act of creating this brine from within there, even though you created the brine from the outside and infused it, but now it's in there, and that too is extracting a liquid from a solid. Mesave, so we ask a contradiction, and the brisa over here is a little bit ambiguous, and each one is going to explain the brisa. Who's the brisa is missing some of the information. They're all going to explain the brisa with the information that would concur with their opinion. Mesave, you can squeeze pickles on Shabbos for if you need it for Shabbos. But you cannot squeeze it for Motzei Shabbos. Now, am I squeezing it because I want the juices, or am I squeezing it because I want the vegetable that I pickled? I want the pickle drier with less brine in it. Similarly, the brisa continues, and olives and grapes may not be squeezed. And if you did so, you have to bring a sin offering. So Kasha Rav, Kasha Shmuel, Kasha Rabbi Yochanan. This is a question to everybody because the brisa does not make the distinctions that they make. So Rav Matar Tzatame, Shmuel Matar Tzatame, Rabbi Yochanan Matar Tzatame. Each one explains the brisa on their terms. After all, the brisa is missing some information because the brisa does not say if I squeezed it because I want the juices, or I squeeze it because I want the food with less juice in it. So Rab explains it this way: you can squeeze pickles on Shabbos, the tzorcha Shabbos, if you need it on Shabbos, but not if you intend to eat it only later after Shabbos. And this is all where I'm squeezing it because I want the pickle with less brine in it. But if I want the brine itself, Pater Avalasa, that's going to be prohibited, even though that I don't bring a sin offering because it's rabbinic. Ushlakas, and what about cooked foods? Bein lagufa, bein lamamein, which the brisa was not talking about cooked. It was talking about kavashim, which is pickle. Cooked food, regardless of whether I want the juices or I want the food, it's going to be permissible. And olives and grapes, which the juices themselves are inherent to the food, you may not squeeze that. Either way, and if you did, you're going to have to bring a sin offering. That's a Torah prohibition. You can squeeze cooked, brine vegetables of foods on Shabbos. L'tzorach Shabbos, if you need it on Shabbos, and huadin l'shlakas, and the same would apply for cooked vegetables. And that's only if you need the food, you want the food, and you don't want the juices. But if you want the juices, pater avalasa, even though that you're exempt because it's not a Torah prohibition, nevertheless it's prohibited. And olives and grapes, you may not squeeze, and if you do squeeze them on Shabbos, you have to bring a sin offering for inadvertently breaking Shabbos on a Torah level. Rabbi Yochanan explains it his opinion. You can squeeze pickles on Shabbos if you intend to eat it on Shabbos, but not if you intend to eat it Motzei Shabbos. Again, that's true for both cooked vegetables and brine vegetables. That's only if you want to eat the food itself. But for its juices, you may not squeeze it. And if you do, it's at the same Torah prohibition as if you squeeze olives and grapes, which if you squeeze unintentionally on Shabbos, you bring a sin offering. So in the name of Rav Ashi said, the only grapes and olives which are primarily made for harvested and brought in for their oils and the juices, they're squeezing them on Shabbos are going to be a Torah prohibition. And so too with in the Academy of Rabbi Menashe, they taught the same thing, that it's a Torah prohibition on olives and grapes alone. The Ein Eid Mepi and another teaching they taught there, nothing to do with our halacha, but in the same context, it was taught as a halachic. This is the halacha. Ein Eid Mepi kosher. A witness who's testifying hearsay says, "I testify that I heard the testimony of so and so." So that's Eid Mepi Eid is only going to be kosher in one case. Only to testify to permit a woman who is an aguna. Her husband left and his whereabouts are unknown. And someone wants to testify and say, look, I know that the husband died. He had traveled to this and this country, and there he got ill and he died. And I wasn't there to witness it, but I heard so directly from someone who was there when he died. And so that testimony to permit the woman to remarry is a leniency, and there we do permit Eid Ben Pi'ed. So the Gemara asks a question, Eid Ben Pi'ed ladies Bechor Ma'u. What about the halacha of a Bechor? Now, halacha we've seen before is the firstborn animal has to go to the Kohen, and unless it has a blemish. And sometimes, and then it becomes a carbon. And sometimes the Kohen would put a blemish into it in order so that he can eat it without going to the Beis HaMikdash. So the question, we need a witness to say that a blemish that happened to it happened inadvertently or happened on its own and not by the hand of the Kohen. Would a witness hearsay work over there? That somebody says, look, I wasn't there, but I heard from so-and-so that was there that this injury happened on its own. So Ravami Aser, Ravami says it does not, it's not permissible, it's not acceptable testimony. And Ravasi Shari, Ravasi says it is permissible testimony. Amar Ravami Ravasi, so Ravami challenged him. It's only permissible for the testimony about a woman remarrying. So he says, no, you make a mistake. No, it's permissible for anything that requires knowledge and not a ceremony of testimony. Anything that needs ceremonial testimony based in, that you can't have hearsay. But anything you need knowledge, and for that a female witness is going to be give you information as well, and so it's going to count as an aid. So any time that you require just to know the facts and not the ceremonial, the process of testimony. So there, a witness from a witness will also go. Hearsay is good enough to find out the facts that this is kosher or that this is what happened and this animal is kosher. Rabbi Yemar Asher Ein Pi'ed LeBechor. Rabbi Yemar therefore said that it was permissible to have a witness, a hearsay witness, a witness from a witness, for Bechor to testify that a firstborn animal it became injured on its own and not by the hands of someone. So Kollel Meremar, so Meremar called him Yemar Shara Bukhra, Yemar who permits the Bechor. And that is indeed halacha, that a witness is testifying in the name of another witness works for Bechor. The Mishnah said squeezing out a honeycomb or allowing the honey to drip out on its own on Shabbos, it's permissible. Also, Rabbi Shaya ben Arda, also V'aisim Asnita B'yadi, brought a Mishnah, a brisa with him. Olives and grapes, that you crush them before Shabbos. And the yatzami atzman, and the juices come out by itself, continue to ooze out on Shabbos, asurin, that's going to be prohibited. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Lezer say no, that it actually is permissible because the work you did, the extraction that you did was before Shabbos. The rest of it's running on its own. Yosef Gavra Yisera Asal Ashmina. Well, we already know this machlokas from our Mishnah. All you're coming to do is add to us the opinion of one more individual. We already know this question from the honeycomb. No, this is a great teaching. The Imam Asnitin, if we would have only had our Mishnah, there beforehand, it's food, and now it's food, because honey itself is a food. But over here we're extracting the juices of grapes and olives, so therefore you're creating a liquid. Maybe even if it happens on its own, it should be prohibited. And therefore we see that even so, Rabbi Lezer Shimon permitted. Anything that is cooked on Shabbos that was cooked prior to Shabbos in hot water, you can reheat it on Shabbos in hot water. They want to say, what are you talking about? What kind of food are you talking about? So kol Shabbat b'chamim erev Shabbos, shor nasa b'chamim Shabbos, you can put it back into hot water on Shabbos and soak it in hot water. B'chol shaleba b'chamim erev Shabbos, and what was not cooked before Shabbos, madichan nasa b'chamim b'Shabbos, you can rinse it off with warm water on Shabbos, but you can't actually soak it in warm water. Chutz min hamaliach hayashav, besides for something that had been salted for a long time, such as pickled meat or pickled fish, there you're completing its process by soaking it, by rinsing it in warm water, because that completes its cooking after it's been brined. That's the way Rashi says it completes the cooking. Similarly, this fish, because rinsing it with warm water is the completion of cooking it. So what are we talking about? That you would cook something and soak it in warm water before Shabbos, and therefore you can reinsert it in warm water on Shabbos. In Eretz Yisrael, they had this food. They would take a chicken and they would cook it for a very long time, until the chicken disintegrated into the liquid and turned into mush, and that was eaten or was a drink that had medicinal properties. Rav Safra said, I actually traveled there once, and they gave it to me, they fed it to me. I got to tell you, it was so sickly, it made me so sick. If he had not given me 3-year-old wine quickly to drink to help me, it's nasai, I would have vomited. Rabbi Yochanan Rayek Mikutach Habavli. Rabbi Yochanan, who met one of the Chachamim, Rabbi Yosef from Bavel, is spit from disgust about Kutach Habavli, which is made up of moldy bread and sour milk and some vinegar as a dip. And so it was disgusting to everyone but the Babylonians. So Amar Rav Yosef, who was a Babylonian, said, "Oh, great! You think that's bad? What about your chicken of Rabbi Abba? That this drink that you have, Valerik Anan Mitarnagolta the Rabbi Abba. We can spit about that. And besides, Amar Rav Gaza Zimna Chadek Lois Lasam. Rav Gaza said, once I traveled there, Va'avdis at Kutach HaBavli, and once I made Kutach HaBavli when I came to Israel for my friends, and Shilam and Ekal Brechid Marava, and everybody that was sick in Eretz Israel asked for some of it. So you see, Kutach HaBavli itself is just as good as your putrid chicken broth that's left for days and days. Tomorrow we'll continue with some of these Kutach HaBavli and Rabbi Abba's chicken broth. And I know that Kutach HaBavli is Michael Rosenberg's favorite food.
Little Kutach HaBavli and a little Morias on the side.
Yes, it is Michael Rosenberg's favorite food.
Yeah,
Wait,
day. So can you do it 3 ways?
All right, have a good day, everyone.
Rabbi, tomorrow it's in the evening, right?
Tomorrow, correct. Tomorrow at the end of Tisha B'Av, after Marav and Shul, we will do a little bit of the daf until we get to we can eat.